Huh. Hmm. You have to know your mission when it comes to political activism. And I learned that by running one of the most, if not the most successful tech startup based political activist groups here in the state of Florida. Guys, my name is Samuel Arms. I'm a political strategist, and I got my start in political strategy actually my senior year of college. My senior year of college, I had just left a lobbying firm that I had tried to work with, and I pitched to them the idea that I wanted to start my own lobbying group specifically for Bitcoin and cryptocurrency. And they didn't like that idea. They didn't want me to pursue that idea. So I ended up leaving the lobbying firm and starting my own consulting group specifically for Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies, now known as Web3 as a whole. But when I started that lobbying firm, I quickly learned that going just on the private sector and trying to get clients was not necessarily the best move to make because I was just a private individual with a cool firm name like Three Gates, which is what I used, but it didn't have any social standing. I didn't have any social standing. So, what I needed to do was form an organization that would represent social standing among people who had no idea who I was, couldn't trust my expertise, and just thought of me as just some recent college graduate. So that's when I started the Florida Blockchain Business Association, which I have now been running for over 5 years and has produced over five pieces of legislation that I have passed in the state of Florida. My original intent, though, with the association was actually to make it kind of like an NRA type organization. I wanted to activate voters and start rating politicians on their scorecards on how they voted when it came to Bitcoin, Web3, and cryptocurrency. Obviously, it would rank from A plus to an F minus, and all with the goal of helping people in Florida know who had their back and who they should be voting for. So I did my market research. I went around the state and I found all the most well respected people in the state at the time in the industry. And here's my thinking. So, what I did was I drove to all the major cities, which in Florida are places like Jacksonville, Tampa, Orlando, Miami, and then smaller areas like Sarasota, Fort Lauderdale, and even Naples, Florida. I drove to all those cities and I went to meetups because here's my logic. If I was going to be a political activist group, I needed people and I needed people movement because in politics, you either move people or you move money. And I wanted to at first focus on moving people. So, my first board of my nonprofit, my association, which is a chamber of commerce, a 501c6, were members and leaders of the largest meetups in the state of Florida. The logic being that those people, those leaders, were already driven by a passion for education to want to educate using their own time people in their local area. It also meant that they had the most community ties and had a lot of respect in their locality. So by finding the head Bitcoin person in Miami, the head Bitcoin person in Jacksonville, the head Bitcoin person in Orlando and Tampa, I would then be the one who has all the respect of all the communities so that when I disseminate information, it is well received. So I started with a grassroots, ground up approach. And this would have worked if I figured out that I wanted to run an NRA type organization. And what that would have looked like was, which I still do today, a Bitcoin day at the Capitol, a Web3 day at the Capitol, where I bring a bunch of people to the Capitol to knock on doors and advocate for legislators. It would have looked like people deciding on how they were going to vote based on the packets that I made and handed out and the ratings that I gave to different politicians. It would have looked like people going out and knocking doors and getting behind pro Web3, pro Bitcoin candidates, as well as deciding who they were going to give their money and time to. But what I learned very quickly was the following lesson. The reason we have a political elite, the reason that our political system is so screwed up, the reason that a lot of people are so disenfranchised is because they don't want to work. They don't want to work in the political field. They want nothing to do with the political class. They would sooner rather complain and not be involved. And that was the number one struggle that I ran into, was that a lot of people spoke a good game. And people will always tell you positive things about what they want to get done, that they are never going to do themselves. They always want someone else to be the political activist. They always want someone else to create the legislation that they would only dream of. And, quite frankly, it's not their fault. In fact, it's human nature to not want to put in the effort to make change. And politics is hard. I picked a hard first business to run, an incredibly hard first is business, because the business had nothing to do with money and everything to do with relationships. And relationships take time to grow. So I had to completely rechange my strategy because I realized that my original strategy to be a grassroots driven network would have required more people movement than what I considered. What I realized was the people that I wanted to move actually didn't want to move at all. They wanted the idea of telling a politician to screw off. They wanted the idea of being politically influential. But at the end of the day, they never wanted to make the time. And so it left me trying to drive people to do things that they themselves naturally did not want to do. So that was one of the biggest lessons that I learned, was that your average voter, your average person in the political system really is inactive and unmotivated. And that does not mean that you can necessarily activate them or motivate them. And they most likely will vote, right? These are going to be voters. However, they are not going to simply go to a politician and educate them on how this technology works. They're not going to make time out of their own day to really pick up the passion for representation in government, going to their city council, their county commission, or even their state representative or their state senator. They're not going to do it because they want someone else to do it for them. But when someone else is your political representative on your behalf, that's where the political elite process is created, because now you are giving someone else the authority to speak on your behalf, like myself. And then someone like myself then develops the entire network using you as the tool. If you understand what I'm saying, that's how incredibly important it is to be politically involved. Because if you were to use someone like me as your tool, which is well and good because I'm an incredibly effective tool, what it also means is you're not building those relationships. I am. So when I leave, who do you go to help represent you? Because you have not built the relationship yourself. And a lot of times it's because people feel detached and they themselves feel like it's pointless to get involved politically. It's pointless to not get involved in the system. They view it as dirty. But that's because they don't really understand how easy it is to affect change. In fact, a lot of times politicians simply just don't know any better when they're passing a bill. I was in Tallahassee and I was talking to a representative, and I was about to start fighting a piece of legislation that would have completely cut off the Bitcoin and Web3 community here in the state of Florida. I walked in with a group of select individuals with me, and I said, well, we wanted to talk about this bill and why we think it's bad. And the politician cut me off right there. He said, wait, stop. We don't need to talk about this anymore because I haven't read the bill. So I looked at everybody. I go, what do you mean you haven't read the bill? And everyone was looking in the room like, oh, a politician didn't read the bill? And it was not a long bill. It was probably a 5-page bill. And he goes, listen, my buddy gave this to me. He told me it was going to be good for your industry. If you disagree, that's perfectly fine. But I had no idea. We just sponsored it for him because he told us to. That's how our political system works. And that's the key. Someone has to be in the ear of these politicians in order to tell them what to do. There are just too many issues, too many subject matter experts for the politician to really understand every specific dynamic. So they rely on lobbyists, they rely on relationships, they rely on experts to help them understand the goal of legislation being passed. And those relationships come normally with donations and voting. So if you're running a grassroots organization and you want it to be effective, you need to make sure that your people under you are motivated and have a good mission. In 2017 and in 2018, the mission that I had created for Florida did not drive a lot of enthusiasm for a lot of people. However, in Florida in 2024, now the enthusiasm is through the roof And the landscape of Florida has completely changed due to the work that we've put in this state and across the country. But I've also changed that business model, which I'll go over in a different video. But the key lesson that I learned when you're going the grassroots way is, even though my mission and my strategy really did not sync up well, because it was my first time experiencing what it was like to move massive amounts of people up into a political channel, what I did learn is how easy it is to organize. And by organize, obviously, I was not able to organize people to get up and come to Tallahassee with me, but I was able to organize them to start communicating with each other. And one of the biggest accomplishments that I created in Florida was to create a network that previously was siloed into one giant loop. So before, all the meetups from Miami to Orlando to Tampa to Jacksonville were all their separate organizations. But I brought them together and started communication between almost every meetup, which added up to over 10,000 people in the state of Florida, in order to start coordinating and talking to each other. And Florida is a big state. From Miami to Orlando is 4 hours. From Orlando to Tampa is 2 hours. From Orlando to Jacksonville is another 2 hours. It's a big state, yet we started cross-pollinating with other meetups and started coordinating around other events. When you are becoming politically active and you find an issue that you're passionate about, finding the right people and knowing the right mission is what is key above all else. It is often why when you see nonprofits started, normally they've started with a board of some of the wealthiest people in that sector, because those wealthy people are able to put up the cash to then fund any movement that you need. Starting a grassroots organization where no one has cash, but people have a lot of passion, is normally doomed to fail, because in order to truly grease the wheels of the political system, money has to come from somewhere. And I was too early, I think, in 2017 and 2018 to really grease the wheels for not only money, but passion in the crypto Bitcoin scene. However, because I was able to keep things alive, I've reaped the rewards and I've stuck it out over time. But that is why it is so important when you are first starting a business and you decide to make your first business a nonprofit, or you decide to make your first business politically charged, you need to make sure that you have the lockdown on your community and the lockdown on the individuals that you are going to pick to be your business partners.